Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell, and primarily you will find me talking about Age of Empires 2 civilization theory crafting, but I have been known to dabble in other matters, such as architecture. I think I speak for us all when I say that the fact that we have multiple architecture sets in Age of Empires 2 is a blessing and is one of the things that helps the game stand out from its competition, especially back when it came out. That being said, we can obviously make it better. I would like to propose a new architecture set, and that architecture set would be an Anatolian architecture set, to be shared by the Byzantines and some of their neighbors. Before we jump into the video, special thanks to a good friend on the Discord channel, a viewer by the name of GearDirector. He is not only a trained Byzantinist who has quite a lot of knowledge on the field, but was kind enough to look through this presentation before I bring it here to you to make sure I didn't make any glaring inaccuracies. In his words, I've been quite opportunistic in my references of real-life buildings to in-game ones, but also in his words, that's pretty much required to make something like this work in-game, and so hopefully you will find it acceptable as well. Before we start, a couple of disclaimers. I am even less of an expert in this field than usual. What I'm proposing here is a dramatic oversimplification and is more like trying to fit the Age of Empires 2 mold with something that would be more historically accurate than what we have now. Also, if you want to see sources, I have this presentation linked down below, and all sources, including all image credits, are in the speaker's notes of the presentation. So, let us proceed. Who would receive the Anatolian architecture set? Well, for those who are in the Anatolian region. Asia Minor was historically dominated by the Byzantines during the Age of Empires 2 relevant time frame, at least right up until the end of it, and there were a number of cultures that they were very close to and influenced very, very heavily, who I think would make more sense to have as this architecture set than others currently in-game. First and foremost, obviously, the Byzantines themselves. Them having Mediterranean is like better than the old Middle Eastern set that they used to have, but still doesn't really fit. And so first and foremost, they really need to have their own. And that's what inspired this build. But also, the Georgians. Now that we have them officially, as well as we have my own build for them, go take a look up here, it does make sense that they would share a set with the Byzantines, but it really makes even less sense that they would have the Mediterranean architecture set. So they are another driving force behind it. Similarly, adjacently, the Armenians, while the Kilikian Armenians are on the Mediterranean, historically, their architecture far more closely resembled the Byzantines. Bear in mind, I've also done my own build for the Armenians. Link to that up here as well if you want to go take a look at it. Highly recommend. And also, another of my own civilizations, the Outremarins, my build for the Crusader states. So, of course, the Crusader states are a very unusual case where they've been influenced by a ton of different ideas. And in my own build, they had a hybrid architecture set already, but I could see it being an option at the very least. So put like a little asterisk by this one that they're like not an absolute shoo-in. If you want to see my build for the Outremarins, take a look up there as well. And lastly, the Bulgarians. Might sound kind of weird. Oh, aren't they Slavic? It's a little more complicated than that. In fact, the Bulgarians had an incredibly close relationship with the Byzantine Empire and were culturally very heavily influenced by the Byzantine Empire, much like, I mean, the rest of the Slavic world, but the Bulgarians in particular just makes sense that they would share a set as well. But now that we know who gets it, let's take a look at the examples of what it would look like. Beginning with the Dark Age. Now, in my ideal world, all architecture sets would have a unique Dark Age look. Like the current hides and shit is like iconic, but it just doesn't make sense for all civilizations, and it looks far more primitive than it really should. So for this Anatolian architecture Dark Age set, they would have a simplified late Roman aesthetic. So you'd be seeing bricks, you'd be seeing some domes, and you'd be seeing a lot of like classic, slightly rounded roof tiles. There would already be some Christian imagery, so things like the town center would probably have like nice Orthodox cross on it, something along those lines. Notably complicated for a Dark Age set, which makes sense, as they were piggybacking on the Romans' legacy. So it only makes sense that they start the game looking kind of like more sophisticated than everyone else. I should also note in this whole presentation, most of the sample images I have here are actually churches. Just kind of imagine their aesthetic superimposed over existing Age of Empires 2 buildings. You get my idea. So before we move on, oh no, where'd I go? Well, I gotta show you the whole thing, don't I? You gotta see all the images in their glory. So take a look. First of all, we have a lovely example of what could be a town center here. Note the window lattices and the buttresses that kind of jut out from between the windows. Very complicated for a Dark Age building, whereas over here, have an example of a house. It should have a dome on it, and maybe not that little cross, because again, this is a church, but I think that having a domed house, even from Dark Age, makes sense for this civilization. Though if you wanted, you could just do kind of the sloped design that is on the right section of that particular building. From here, though, we take a look at the Feudal Age. Hello again. First of all, you're going to see more striated brickwork. Namely, you'll have like stripes and designs in the brickwork. The roof tiles would become red rather than the kind of like brownish gray I had, and there would be even greater intricacy. There's still a lot of domes, plus even more fancy window grills like you saw in the last one. And we'd see fortifications cropping up. The fortifications would be kind of notably boxy. Kind of looking like the Mediterranean fortifications we have now, but maybe even more block-like. Goodbye again. What do we have here for examples? Another town center example. You can see how what I was going for here, like the kind of stacked style of building with a big thing in the center. But we also have a barracks over on side. You can see how this kind of looks like the facade of a barracks in game right now. And look at that beautiful patterning in the brickwork. I think that's awesome, and it would definitely, maybe not as complicated as you see here, but that sort of thing would be showing up in Feudal Age. And then an example of a tower, blocky with that kind of sloped, pointy roof line. So hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down at this point, but let's move on to the Castle Age. Hello again. At this point, we keep with the previous, so it's still complicated, still that striated brickwork, all that stuff, but it has a slightly more rounded and kind of refined look. And you'd start to see these distinct, like low conical blue-black domes popping up. These are very, very common in Byzantine architecture, especially later on, and I think should be like iconic to the civilization's late game look. Not only that, but it would help contrast with like the red-roofed Mediterranean set. You have a lot of arches, more buttresses, cupolas, and in general, they would stick with the theme of like an extravagant and opulent architecture feel in comparison to other current civilizations. Goodbye again. Let's see what we have here. Another potential town center. I don't think this one works quite as well as some of the previous examples, but you get the idea. It has the grills, it has the thing in the middle, it has the kind of like tapering design off to either side. But we also see what I think could be a great university over here, giving a great example of what I think those like low domes could look like as an overall aesthetic. Just imagine that sort of feel implemented on other buildings like archery ranges as well. I think it'll look perfect. And then we'd see something like a fortified wall. Again, a very blocky, boxy design with those cool striations and maybe some cool little buttresses or something to make it stand out even more from other civilizations. Hopefully you're seeing how like the town center progression is going. I found what I thought could be good town center buildings for every single age. And hopefully they paint kind of a cohesive picture of how the civilization should evolve over time. But we have some more Castle Age examples for you too. Here's what I think a castle should look like. I don't love the color, but I like the look quite a lot. You see what I mean again with the boxy design, some sloped walls on the sides. I'd want the color scheme to be different to match them better, but they wouldn't have the same kind of domed look as the others and would be maybe a little more brutalist if you want to use that word, even though I, again, would want them to be better decorated. But over here, we have an example of what I think the monastery should look like. The Anatolian architecture set should have some of the most extravagant monasteries in the game. It's kind of what they were known for. Plus, I think that bell tower in front looks fantastic. Now, let's take a look, finally, at Imperial Age. Hello again. In Imperial Age, we see all of the previous, but even more. Crank the luxury up to 11. Additionally, I'd want to see more intricate patterns on the fronts of the buildings, the facades. Classically speaking, you'd sometimes see like mosaics and wall paintings on the outside of big Byzantine buildings, but that might be like a little too much. So something that kind of suggests that sort of architectural decoration. I'd also want to see colonnades, like rows of columns outside certain prominent buildings like town centers and universities and similar. And so what would this look like in practice? Well, let me show you. First of all, we have a final potential town center example. Look at those beautiful archways over the windows with the patterning and the brickwork, and oh, it's so pretty. And similarly, a lovely university potential off to the side with the arches between the columns out in front and topping with one of those classic domes with so much detail in the way that the brickwork is laid out on the arch gables, for example. I just think it would look incredible and it'd be an absolute shame to miss out on. And with that, hello again, we come to the end of this short architectural presentation. Thank you guys so much for watching. How did you like the aesthetic that I came to? And do you think that an Anatolian architecture set would be a good addition to the game? And if so, how how high of a priority do you think it is? It definitely wouldn't hurt, and on the topic of historical authenticity, it would add a lot. Not to mention, if they ever did like a rework of the Byzantines, it could be a great way to kind of zhuzh them up and make them feel a little more poppy and exciting, because wow, this classic civilization's getting a fresh coat of paint in addition to some kind of Persian-esque rework. Do you think that I messed up any of the history? Are there any like architectural terms that I screwed up? If so, let me know down below. And as always, if you have any other thoughts on smaller side projects that you'd like to see on the channel like this, I would love to hear from you. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.